We welcome Richard Clapton to noise11.com with something, very different, Richard. I think a long time in the coming. I think we would call this a labour of love over a long period of time. Music is love. Congratulations on this album. It's basically a document to your fans of the music that you've been inspired by.
Yes, I mean, almost my musical DNA. Because, and as you know, I tend to be quite verbose in my answers. I'll try and keep this short and sweet. So I started with Bob Dylan when I was very young, and the Byrds started covering Bob Dylan. And so then I got into the Byrds because of that. So it was kind of a genesis in a way, because then after the Byrds came Neil Young and, obviously Crosby Stills Nash Young. However, I actually went to London in the late 60s, and I only had one album, which was After the Gold Rush by Neil Young, which has Southern Man and, After the Gold Rush. And, look.
Look at that.
You've got it all. Yeah. Honestly, I listened to that. I just gorged on that. I just listened to it constantly. That and Blonde on Blonde. And so I really started to get into this genre around about 1967. And as the name implies on the front of the album, well, I'm going to say my album of other people's songs. These songs from 1968 to, what does it say? Oh, no, 1966, doesn't it?
1966 to 1970.
Yeah. And we had to get quite sharply focused because we didn't want it to sound like a covers album. So over a long period of time, Terry Blamey and I, now I'm a bit all over the place here, Paul. I don't even know whether I should start again.
No, all right. Let me tie it all together. Terry Blamey, who is now managing you, used to manage Kylie Minogue, now looking after Richard Clapton, decided we should put all this together.
Yeah. Folks, it's just Paul had to give me a crash course in Zoom, setting up Zoom before this. So my mind is a little scrambled at the moment. I'm still trying to get my head around Zoom. Okay. So, yes, I befriended Terry Blamey, or he befriended me a few years ago. I went to San Francisco, and when I returned, I had a night with Terry, and, in the early hours of the morning, Terry said, "Oh, you know what we should do? We should do an album of hippie anthems." So that's what we've done. And we started out casting a very broad net, which also encompassed British rock, because obviously I'm a big Stones fan. And, as far as I'm concerned, like Stones songs, hippie songs like Street Fighting Man, etc. However, after a while, and process of elimination, we started to cull them down. And as I said a moment ago, we didn't want this to sound like it's a homage. It's not an album of covers, we hope. It doesn't come across that way. So we culled it down until we had a very sharp focus, pretty much like a follow spot on stage. And it really is probably best described as Laurel Canyon, 1966 to 1970.
Just the fact that you've called it 66 to 70, does that tend to indicate that, that's part one of a series of volumes of this sort of music that will come out, a bit like a songbook that Rod Stewart did?
Well, that's a really good question with a bit of a sad tinge to it, because Michael Gudinski, I think before Michael had heard this album, I think he was kind of a little apprehensive about whether this was a good idea or not, because Terry seems to make a practice of holding the music back from everybody until we're totally happy with it. When Gudinski finally heard the album, he was just exploded with the enthusiasm, and really, I think in the last few months of his life, he grew more and more attached to this project. And it's only a few weeks ago in a conversation with him where he really wanted to start discussing album 2 after this. So, as I said, just got a rather sad outcome, but under the circumstances. But yes, so there was, while Gudinski was still alive, there was going to be an album 2. Yeah.
But what about you personally? Would you continue on with the project?
Yes. Now, which direction I would take is interesting, because I could either, obviously, I'm well versed in British rock from the late 60s. And I mean, I saw so many gigs in London in those days. And, because I'd seen, the original Pink Floyd with Sid Barrett, and that's how old I am. Just giving it away. But Free and Stones, just so many great bands. Fleetwood Mac from those days, the original Fleetwood Mac. Now, I could turn my focus to that direction or continue on in California and move on to Jackson Browne and the Eagles, follow down that path. So, to be honest with you, I hadn't given enough thought to really make a decision which fork in the road I should take. But it will be one of those two directions.
That'd be interesting with the Jackson Browne direction, because I guess you almost had parallel careers at one point in the 70s.
Yes, because his first album was 1972, and Prussian Blue, my album was it 1972 or 73? There's no doubt about it. I love doing interviews with Paul Cashmere. He's already got answers to my questions. We're going, me first album. Paul goes, say no more. Richard, 1970, was it 1973? You didn't even read it. It's on the back.
1973.
There you go. So I was a year after Jackson Browne.
And the title track from the album comes from a David Crosby song.
Yes.
Which prompts me, Richard, to do.
That's the one. So, David Crosby, I became. I fell in love with David Crosby and became. I don't know. Crosby was one of those epiphanies in my life, just like Bob Dylan had been. Now, the story behind this album, I've been reading up about this a bit recently, and it's a really interesting story. I've always been aware of Crosby's history and the fact that in the latter days of the Byrds, there was a lot of problems, and I think he'd been going through a tough period. So what he said in this recent interview I read is that first solo album of his, it was something he just had to do, because he got so heavily into drugs and he was so distraught. I mean, he was a very damaged human being at the time. By that time, I had moved to Berlin, and I lived in Berlin for over 2 years. Had a German band and everything, and in the German band, I had this amazing guitar player called Ziggy, or Siegfried too, and Ziggy actually got into this David Crosby album because all the songs, each song has a different guitar tuning, which is what attracted him. And I think that was the first time I'd ever gotten a smoking pot. And, pot and Crosby go together. And Ziggy and I just listened to that album over and over again. And then if you fast forward decades, many decades, then Danny Spencer, who I've been playing with now for 22 years, Danny's an aficionado of this sort of genre of music. Don't know how to describe it. I mean, I don't know. It's not country rock, and it's, I don't know. I'm lost for words there. But anyway, early in my relationship with Danny, I got Danny into this David Crosby album, and Danny just ate it up. So by the time we got through this album, Music Is Love, well, it's not an easy song to reproduce. It's quite amazing. Danny ended up doing pretty much all of it himself because it's a strange tuning. all the parts are very strange. Everything about the song is strange. But Jenny just had total control of the song. And the other thing I've got to say is we recorded all these band tracks at our studio in Sydney called Rancom, which is owned by Garth Porter. Rancom's great because it's very authentic. It's got all the old gear and, old Norman mics and old outboard gear, which gives you that, authentic old sound. And then we had to have time off because 3 of the boys play with Jimmy Barnes and drummers and Baby Animals. I was touring as well, very heavily. So we had to put it on the back burner for several months, and then COVID hit. So this album is, all the overdubs, like the guitar overdubs, all the backing vocals were done by Danny, except for Love the One You're With, which is Mahalia Barnes, Eliza Jane Barnes and Darren Percival. But every other vocal is by Danny. And that's because he was in St Kilda, which was a hot spot. So he couldn't really go anywhere. So we did the bulk of this album on laptops, remote down laptops.
The song listing is interesting. There's The Doors in there, Summer in the City, the John Sebastian Love and Spoonful song. But it does centre around the music of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, both as a group and solo.
Yeah. Which is a fair enough comment, and I would say that's the truth. That despite the fact that Terry and I spent probably 2 years curating this album, we had lists, such long lists of songs, and these have been culled down tremendously. So it's interesting that was just a natural conclusion that, at the end of song selection, we ended up with a lot of Crosby Stills Nash Young.
What are the plans to sort of put these songs into a set list now? Because obviously you've got a very strong set list whenever you go out. You've had so many hits over the years. How do you then squeeze all the songs that we have here into a show? Do you do a specific show focused on this? Do you sort of divide the show now into 2 parts? How's it work?
That's the best question I can be asked at this point in time, because it's getting nigh on impossible. And just to remind you that I've done 4 indie albums now, which I'm really proud of, starting out with Diamond Mine, and inevitably older songs have to be pushed out to make room for newer songs. Like I've just done a weekend in Melbourne and we're playing for over 2 hours without me realising it. And that's because Terry has been insisting more hippie songs. And so, I shouldn't be telling my fans this, but this week, Get Back to the Shelter lost out to Buffalo Springfield. So Paul, it's a really good question, because as the years go on, and I hope I'll stick around for some time longer, you were asking about a sequel to this album, and it's just going to get harder and harder, because this weekend in Melbourne, it was really, really difficult, and I just hope I didn't disappoint anyone, because I was doing 5 hippie songs, which means 5 less Richard Clapton songs, and I just hope nobody was disappointed with that, because it's just, as I said, I can't really help it. And I'm barely doing anything from I'm only doing 1 song from Harlequin Nights. I don't think I'm doing any from Diamond Mine anymore. But yeah, anyway, that's my sticky situation.
Remember the fun old days of radio, whenever they'd release a single and they'd give an edited version? I always remember Deep Water, the single version compared to the album. Maybe you're going to have to start doing all the single versions of your songs.
Wasn't the success for Deep Water attributed? And let me tell you my version of the story first, because I was in Berlin. I did not wish to return, and I didn't want to do that album, but I was coerced into coming back, and I'd made the condition, okay, if I come back for for a first time ever in my short career, then it's going to be a work of art. It's not going to be just another, album of radio-friendly singles. So then I've been told, because I insisted that Deep Water would remain intact the way I wrote it, it ends up being about 6.5 minutes. And radio loved it because you could go for a piss. It was the only record you had. Oh, that and Stairway to Heaven, probably.
What about the story with Down in the Lucky Country? Because we're always talking about, all this pro-Australia stuff, and there's so much controversy in this country at the moment with Australia Day and whatever. Down in the Lucky Country is considered to be one of those pro-Australian songs, but it's actually not, is it?
No, it's. I think the word for it would be sardonic. It's a sardonic look at Australia. I, like most of my generation, was at loggerheads with my parents' generation, because the Australian generation of the 50s was really, really conservative right wing. And, that was under Robert Menzies, and Australia's a very racist country back in those days, and not a nice country, quite frankly. It was very anti-Asian, and, Menzies kept going on about the White Australia policy and the yellow peril and all that sort of crap. So our parents were brought up in that atmosphere, and then tried to foist that on us, on my generation. And I'm 70 now, so that's the generation I'm talking about. And so Down in the Lucky Country, it's bittersweet with this dark underbelly. So it is. From one perspective, if you look at it in one way, it is a song of praise for Australia. This really is the lucky country. And then the sardonic part comes into it. Then I'm going, yeah, we're doing all right because we're making money. And it's like, screw the other guy. We're all right. I'm all right, Jack. That sort of attitude. And then the bridge part of the song is people building up impossible walls and call it home sweet home. They buy up false security and force it on their sons, as rings true to me. Yes, and as I mean, people have. It's great that you picked up on that, Paul. Did I ever tell you that was a main contender for the 2000 Sydney Olympics, because it was the people on the Olympics committee thought it was the most patriotic Australian song ever written. Well, in a way, it is. Yes. There's nice bits in the song. You've got to admit. I mean, I'm talking about the trams running down to the sea at Bondi Beach, and beautiful little beach scenarios and stuff. So it's not all critical.
Okay, so in the meantime, we have this album, Music is Love, and look at the guy on the back. Who's that?
I'm trying to get back to that now, Paul. See, it's getting there. Look, it's getting there. And once again, it's dreadfully sad to have to mention Michael Gudinski at all, but I think 3 or 4 nights before he died, you'd get these random phone calls from him at all hours of the night. It was about 11:15 at night, and he never said hello or anything. It was like, so I hope you're growing that hair. How long is it now? It's getting there, Michael. What? And he goes, so what shirt are you going to wear in this video? It better be hippie. What do you got? I said, I don't know. Because I was half asleep. It's like, I've got a Grateful Dead. Yeah, I'll wear that. I should have worn the Grateful Dead to do this interview, actually. I've only got one Grateful Dead shirt. But yeah, and then as we know, 3 days later was he'd passed. But yeah, so I mean, really, there's a lot of his influence anyway in this album. So all those old photos, folks, you ask Paul, it's worth the price of the album just to see photos of me with hair down to my ass. I think I had the world's longest hair, didn't I? Back in the day.
All right, good to see you, Richard.
Thanks, Paul. Great interview.